Has anyone ever heard of Webster, Georgia? Do you have any idea where it's located? Well, Webster County is a tiny little county in southwest Georgia. The county seat is Preston. And that too is a tiny little place. Doesn't even have a stoplight. But Preston, for many years, did have one thing that drew people from far and wide, from neighboring counties and beyond. Preston had a restaurant. It was the only restaurant in all of Webster County. Sad to say, this past December, it closed after 30 years. It was called Mom's Kitchen. Now, all those years ago, a local banker who was white urged a woman named Maggie Grimes, who was black, to open a restaurant because he thought there ought to be a place in Webster County where you could eat. So Maggie Grimes opened Mom's Kitchen. She didn't think she'd be there for 30 years, 30 days, let alone 30 years. But Mom's Kitchen remained there for all those years because, as her customers would gladly tell anyone, you wouldn't find a better food anywhere, a better meal anywhere. Now, Maggie opened for breakfast at 5:30 a.m. and went right on through dinner. The food was served in the standard Southern buffet style, but actually that was a bit misleading because in truth, you could get anything you wanted at Mom's Kitchen. The walls were plastered with posters for dishes that weren't in the steam tables, but they were available along with anything else you might have a taste for. As Maggie said, you got time to wait while we cook it? We'll sure cook it for you. But the big item at Mom's was the $5.99 all-you-could-eat fish dinner, featuring catfish, perch, or mullet. People would come from a long way off for that. And people would come from a long way off for another reason too. It was a family restaurant, as one regular put it. And what it was, and what a family it was that gathered day after day. White and black, farmer and banker, young and old, rich and poor, city slickers and country folk. And they would sit together and eat and talk and share the news of the day. They would talk about crops and children and problems and rumors of a new factory and maybe some jobs. And high school football, of course. 30 years ago, no one dreamed that the day would come when regulars would walk in and greet one another with a wave and ask about the kids or the wife, because 30 years ago, they might not have even acknowledged one another on the street, let alone sit together. And it wasn't that long ago when whites and blacks wouldn't even have been in the same restaurant if they could help it, and certainly not share the same booth and the good food. But little by little, over the years, the walls of fear and suspicion and hatred between races and classes and country folk and city slickers too crumbled a bit. Of course, there were probably much that held some people apart, but you had to believe that you couldn't eat at Mom's Kitchen day after day and then go back out onto the street and easily pick up the same old feelings and attitudes. You got the feeling that Mom's Kitchen changed you in ways you didn't realize at first. Something happened at Mom's, more than the menu or the posters or steam tables led up. Now, Mom's Kitchen was easy to find. You just took US 280 into Preston, and you looked for a building with some primitive murals painted on the brick walls. They were done by a local artist. One mural showed Jesus and his disciples at the Last Supper. Right next to that was one showing a long scene of folks, white and black, enjoying a picnic beside a river. The artist said it depicted a family reunion. And really, That was what you found at Mom's. Something of Christ, something of communion, something sacramental, a regular family reunion. If you would have looked with more than your eyes and would have listened with more than your ears, you would have found something of Jesus hosting a meal, and you would have experienced something of that family reunion and would have begun to recognize strangers and all sorts of people to be your long-lost brothers and sisters. And when you had left filled with the best fish you had ever eaten, or the tastiest greens or pecan pie you had ever put to your lips, you would have found it harder to hold on to the old fears and suspicions and hostilities, and you would have come to see more and more people for what they truly were. Family, members of the same family, God's own family. It was just something about Mom's kitchen. And how this world could use a few more places like Mom's. And yet, we actually do have places like Mom's, or rather places that should be like Mom's. And what I mean is that we have many churches. In a very real sense, church should be like Mom's kitchen. Abide in me, Jesus said, as I abide in you. And down through the centuries, that has been taken to mean many different things. To pray constantly, to think only of Jesus, to do good works, to seek some kind of mystical union, and other things as well. But when Jesus said, as I abide in you, he meant the entire community of believers. The you is plural. And so he wasn't simply talking about abiding in this individual or that individual, but in the church, the community of believers. He was talking about abiding, living in us as a church. But how does he live in us as a church? Well, what Jesus said was, if you abide in me, and my words abide in you. Which is to say, we abide in Jesus as his words abide, live in us as a community. What words? Well, the early church believed it was his words about loving God and the other. And in our second lesson, it's spelled out about as strong and clear as it can be. Those who say, I love God, and hate their brothers and sisters are liars. For those who do not love a brother or sister whom they have seen cannot love God whom they have not seen. The commandment we have from him is this: those who love God must love their brothers and sisters also. Now yes, for starters, brothers and sisters mean fellow members of the church. And so Jesus abides in us and we in him as we love God by loving others in the community of the church. And again, though, what does that mean? Well, as one author has put it, loving each other doesn't mean loving each other in some sentimental, unrealistic, greeting card kind of way, but the way families love each other. Even though they might fight tooth and nail and get fed up to the teeth with each other and drive each other crazy, yet all the time knowing deep down in their hearts that they belong to each other and need each other and can't imagine what life would be without each other. Even those they wish had never been born. In other words, picture Mom's kitchen. Picture all kinds of different people. White and black and Asian and Latino and Native American and young and old and rich and poor and stranger and friend coming together for meals. Some of them may not like each other very much. Some may drive each other crazy. Some might get fed up with each other. Some might actually argue tooth and nail. But as they eat together time and time again, as they talk and laugh and listen, little by little, they realize that they are family and belong to each other and need each other and can't imagine life without each other. Something happens between them and to them. And something keeps happening when they leave. Something like love happens and seeing each other beyond the walls as brothers and sisters. And actually, that is the church. Coming together for a meal, for communion as we do today, for the Lord's Supper, the Last Supper, and other meals too. Talking and getting to know each other and sharing hopes and troubles and dreams, realizing we belong to each other and need each other. You can't imagine life without each other. Something happening between us and to us. Something like love happening. Learning in here what it means to love a brother or sister. And then taking it out into the world. It's what Jesus calls us to be. Mom's kitchen. Because that's what God's own creation, this world, this city, our own communities need. Right from the get-go, that has been God's purpose and plan for God's own creation to find peace and joy with one another in their love for one another. To be a family, to know the delight of that. But right from the get-go, creation has been bent on other things, to play God, follow its own purposes, each are going his or her own way, each looking out for himself or herself alone, building walls of fear or suspicion or hatred. So what God needs, what God has always needed, is a people who are like a light to others in the darkness. People who can be healers and reconcilers. And God needs places where that happens. Places where people finally learn to see each other as they truly are and offer that hope and healing to others. It's what we're called to be. But I guess the question is that what churches today really are? You know, when I first came to Clayton County 45 years ago, everybody in the county I met, leaders, were proud of the fact that Clayton had 139 churches. And Fulton and Fayette counties also boasted of the churches they had. How many there are now, who knows? But the question is, have they made any difference over the years? Of course, someone might say, think of the thousands who have found Jesus, who have been saved. Okay, fine. But have all those thousands made any difference? Do we in the Atlanta area actually see each other as brothers and sisters? Have any of the walls come down? Do we see signs of healing and reconciling? Or does whatever happen in churches, whatever happens with all those saved individuals pretty much stay within themselves? Does all the talk we hear in this city from Christians about loving God lead to any visible love for members of God's own family beyond their own families? You have to wonder some days. But in many respects, we have come a long way. But in other respects, we still have a long way to go. Maybe the best way to put it is to say that everything has changed in those 45 years. And yet, nothing has changed. Scratch the surface. Still see it. If whatever's happening in the thousands of churches in this city of ours doesn't lead people out of themselves to the other, if it doesn't lead to some healing and hope, then what's happening. It doesn't seem to have a lot to do with what God wants to have happening. And there are days when I think we'd be far, far better off with fewer churches and a lot more restaurants like Mom's. And that gives me an idea. Maybe every church should paint a couple of murals on their outside walls. One of the Last Supper and one of a family reunion. And be a place where people can get a meal that nourishes and strengthens, where people can sit down together and talk and get to know one another, where something of Christ happens. And people are filled with hope and love when they leave. And then, see what happens. Amen.